Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where it's the best place to learn about Canadian finance. Now this week I actually had a lot of discussion with different clients on their plans to purchase their investment homes. We went through a lot of different Excels, calculations, and concepts when it comes to investing in properties. So what I want to do in this video is pick two of the more interesting scenarios, go through it together, and then let's see if we can learn something from it. And also at the end, I'll give some of my thoughts when it comes to investing in properties. So if you're someone that's always been interested in investing in properties, then this is a perfect video for you. Now without further ado, let's get started. Now, before I start, just to let you know, whatever you're seeing here, I've actually simplified a lot of the information. I took out a lot of the other detailed calculations, so then the video is not as cluttered because I just want to get some of the points across. So if you're going to do your own calculation or your own Excel sheet, make sure you check online or talk to a professional and make sure you have calculated every single area and done all the research necessary to make a more informed decision on your situation. Alright, so the first case I want to talk about is a client that have one principal home already. They're getting ready to buy another house. Now for this client, what they care the most about is the return on investment. They just want to be very efficient with every single dollar that they would have to put into their investment property. They want to get the maximum benefit back. So that's what we'll be focusing on here. And currently this is their situation. They have a property that have 100,000 home equity line of credit room at prime plus 0.5%. Client makes 120k a year, so marginal tax rate will be about 40% in BC. So they wanted to buy something that's 700k, and according to research, their expected average rent would be about 2,700. So before we talk, originally this was their plan. They wanted to take 100k of their cash as down payment, plus the 40k of line of credit that's in the current home to make up a total of 20% down pay. And for the remaining 80%, which is 560k, they wanted to borrow a mortgage at 2%, 5 years variable, 25-year amortization. So right away, this is their monthly breakdown cost. For their 40k HELOC at 2.95%, paying just interest, they would pay $98 per month. For the mortgage, they would have to pay $2,300-ish per month. There's property tax, insurance, property management fee because they will be hiring someone, utility. So the total cost they estimated will be about $2,995. And because the rent they're expecting is $2,700, their net cash flow will be negative $295 per month. Essentially, they're willing to fork out $300 a month just to keep this house and rely on the future growth, which in the area they are buying, they believe should have decent growth in the next 10, 20 years. Now, what we have done is actually came up with two different alternatives that they can consider, and that would improve their situations. The first alternative is using HELOC mortgage plus a regular mortgage. So if you're not sure what a HELOC mortgage is, you can actually check out the video I posted right here, which I have explained in detail before what it is and how it's different from a home equity line of credit, even though they sound very similar. Essentially what it is, it's a mortgage that you can get instead of a regular mortgage. It is an interest-only mortgage and the usual rate is prime plus 0.5%. The maximum you can get for a HELOC mortgage is 65% of your house value. So if the client qualifies for the maximum, then the setup will look something like this. 65% of the house will be a HELOC mortgage, 15% will be a regular mortgage just like the one she's gonna get, and then 20% will be her down payment, which inside currently consists of 100k cash, plus 40k equity from the first home. Now with this setup, this is what the cash flow is going to look like. For the 40k equity from home, she's still going to pay $98 like before. For the 65% of the house, which is a HELOC mortgage, she's going to borrow $455,000 here at prime plus 0.5%, which is 2.95, and pay interest only. So her monthly interest payment would be $1,119. And she also has a 15% of the house as a regular mortgage, same as before, and her payment would be $445. Now she's still gonna have the same property tax, insurance, property management fee, utility. So with this, the total expense is $2,188. Now the rent is still gonna be $2,700. So with this, their net cash flow is positive $512 a month. So why is this happening? It's because we've moved a large portion of our borrowing into a HELOC mortgage, which only requires interest payment. And because we're not paying principal into it, that significantly brings down our monthly expense. And now our rent is able to cover everything. We don't have to take anything out of our pocket. We even have some positive cash flow per month left. But if we're focusing purely on return on investment based on how much we're putting out of our pocket, we can actually improve our rate of return here even more. So the alternative 2 is we're still going to do the same as before, 65% HELOC mortgage, 15% regular mortgage, 20% down. And currently the 20% down is going to be 100K cash and 40K house equity. But since we have 100K equity in the original house to use, and the client is not planning to use this for anything in the future, we can actually flip it around and do 40K cash and 100K house equity. So now the cost is going to look something like this. For our 100K equity from home at 2.95%, the monthly interest will be $246. Everything else will be the same as our last example. This will give us a total cost of $2,336, and with rent $2,700, our net cash flow will be positive $364. Now right here you might say, wait a minute, didn't our cash flow just decrease from 500 something to 300 something because we borrow more equity from our first home, so our cost increased? How is this going to be better for us? Well, yes, even though our cash flow decreased in this case, our rate of return on the actual money we put out increased. And here is the calculation for each scenario. Now, because the client is in their early 50s and they're planning to hold this for at least 25 years, well into their retirement, let's assume we hold for that long and it appreciates at 3% a year. After 25 years, their 700K home is going to worth 1.46 million right now, just a little over double. So let's calculate the rate of return on each scenario. In our original plan, we sold the home for 1.46 mil. Now we're going to minus 40K for the equity on our first home because we have never paid that back. At the end, we have a net 1.425 mil on hand before tax. But because my client cares about how much they put out versus how much they get back, so let's first look at how much they actually contributed towards this house. Well, first of all, their first cost will be the down payment of 100K cash. Then, monthly, they have to put out $295 per month, assuming all the interest rate, everything stays the same for the next 25 years. That's an additional $88,500 they will have to put into this rental. Their total cost would be $188,500. That's how much money they actually put out of their pocket into this investment home for the last 25 years using this simple calculation. Now, if we take 1.425 mil minus what they put out, divided by that amount times 100%, it's going to give them a total return of investment for 656%. And if we divide this by 25, their simple yearly ROI will be 26.25%, which is not bad. However, let's compare to the first alternative. And in here, we forked out 100K just like before as a down payment. However, for monthly, we didn't put anything more into this place. We actually got a surplus of $512, but let's ignore that for now. Let's just say our expense out is zero. So doing it this way, our home is still going to sell for 1.46 mil. Now we have to pay back the 65% HELOC mortgage because we never pay any principal into it, which is $455,000. Plus we have to pay back the 40K equity from our first home, which we also never pay back. So minus everything, in the end on our hand, we have $970,000 left. Minus what we put out, which is 100K, divided by that times 100%, our total return on investment is 870%. And then our simple return for the last 25 years will be 34%. So right here, you can see that our return of investment significantly increased compared to before. Now, one thing to remember is this is just looking at the house growth versus how much money we actually put in. We didn't take into effect of the surplus $512 we will be getting per month for next 25 years using the simple calculation. So if we do something with it, for example, put it into a TFSA or RSP and further invest that into a separate vehicle, our total return would have been even more than 800 something percent. But just to keep it simple, we're not going to look into the side investment portion. Now, moving on to the last alternative. So here we still sold for 1.465 mil. We're going to pay back 65% of our HELOC mortgage, which is $455,000. We also have to pay back 100K of equity we took out from our first home. Doing all that is going to give us 910,000 left on our hand. But what if we actually take out of our pocket in this example from day one? Well, it's only the 40K cash that we actually put in. Everything else was borrowed and all the costs were covered from our rent. So if we minus 40K and divide by 40K times 100%, our total return is going to be 2,176%, making our simple yearly return 87%. So here our return improved even more than before. Plus, we also don't have to invest that 60K extra into our home. We could have used that on the side into our TFSA and RSP and generate return there as well. So now let's answer some very common questions that people come up with on top of their head. Number one is, why is this happening? Well, first you have to understand that in a property, when do you actually make the most money? It's when it appreciates and then you sell it, right? So here's the question. Does the appreciation in your property have anything to do with how much equity you own inside? Well, the answer is no. Because imagine this. Let's say you have a house for 500K today. It grows to 600K. So you made 100K on it, right? Does it matter if you own 100% of the house or you own 0% of the house? It doesn't matter. You still made 100K from this property. All it changes is how much cash you will have on your hand when you sell. So with that in mind, you would want to pay as little into your investment home as possible because its appreciation has nothing to do with how much equity you actually own. Now, with that being said, you need to understand the second thing is this way of setting it up always the preferred way and always better and always the best for everyone else? The answer is no. Doing something like this also have its downside and danger, and you need to be fully aware what you're going through. Because here, you're simply leveraging more than your original scenario. Because in the original scenario, you're going to be paying down your principal, so you're actually deleveraging as you go. But in the alternatives, you're actually staying leveraged, and that's how you're able to get a bigger return on investment because you're putting less money in. So this way, because you're staying leveraged, you're staying borrowed, you're more susceptible to an interest rate increase. So you need to be aware of that and adjust accordingly if something like that does happen. Also, even though your return on investment percentage-wise increase, the actual money left on your hand, if you're just looking at buying the property and then sell it later, how much money you have left on your hand is actually less because you have never paid any principal into it. So what that means is, for all the monthly rent that you freed up and all the down payment that you didn't have to put towards your house, you have to invest that on the side. You can't just let it sit on a saving account or just spend it. If you're just going to do something like that, I would not recommend going for alternative 1 or 2, because if you don't have that discipline to stay invested, you will be left with less overall cash, and that could affect your retirement. So you need to keep that in mind. Ask yourself, do you have the discipline to invest on the side to generate more return? And I didn't really touch up the topic of write-offs here, which is also very important when it comes to investment property, which I will talk slightly on in the next example. But you also want to keep in mind your current income level, how much tax you're paying, and what kind of write-off you're generating in each scenario. That can also play a role in deciding which setup is the best for you. So let's move on to the second case, which is slightly different. This is a client looking to get an investment property to fund their retirement income. Now, the client only care about generating a positive cash flow to fund their semi-retirement. They're still going to keep working as long as they can, but they want to have some positive cash flow coming in. They do not care about property appreciation or paying any principal into it, because they're going to keep it for life as long as possible. And when they pass away, they will just give the whole thing to their kids and they can decide whatever they want to do with it. If it appreciates by then, that's their gains, good for them. But at this moment, my client just care about cash flow. So here's the current situation. They're making 100K income, 38% marginal tax rate in BC. They currently own one home and half of it is rented out to someone for $2,500 a month while they live in another half. They currently have 600K mortgage in their first home at 1.97%, amortized for 25 years. They're looking to buy an investment home for 900K budget. So original plan, what they wanted to do is, because they have 400K cash on the side, they were going to put 100K towards their first home, pay down the mortgage, so bring it down to 500K, And then the other $300K will be acting as a down payment for the second home, and then they will borrow $600K on top. Now, the estimated rent after the second home is bought will be about $4,000 a month. So cash flow wise, this is what they're looking at. House number one's rent $2,500. So for their first house mortgage, they're gonna pay $100K down and keep it at the same amortization as before. So bring down the monthly payment to $2,110 per month. Now, second home's rent is gonna give $4,000 with a mortgage of $600K for 25 years. So it will be roughly $2,532 with the current interest rate. Now, to keep everything simple, I'm gonna ignore other expense because no matter what we do to this, other expense don't change. It's only the mortgage expense that will change in this setup. So cash flow before all other expense and tax will be $1,858. Yearly cash flow before other expense and tax, $22,000. But because the client wants to keep more on hand afterwards, we also want to consider a write-off in this case. And it looks something like this. House number one's average rough interest they pay per year for the next 5 years would be about $9,000 a year. And they can only write 50% of this off because half of the house is self-use, half of the house is rental. So they can write off about $4,500 here. Now, house number two, the rough interest they will have to pay for the next 5 years would be $10K, almost $11K a year. They can write off 100% here because it's pure rental. So they can write off the whole thing, $10,000. Add the two together, the total interest write-off would be $15,000. Now, like I said, there are other write-offs that we can do here, like property tax and all that stuff, but we're going to ignore all that because it's going to be the same no matter what scenario we're in. Looking at this, there are two issues. One is that the house number one write-off is very inefficient because half of the house is being used by the owner, so they can't write off that half. And number two is because the main concern is cash flow and not appreciation or paying into the equity of the house. They do not necessarily want to pay principal into the investment home. They rather keep more on hand. So we're going to fix both problems by doing the following. We're first going to take all $400K to pay down our current mortgage. Now, doing that is going to bring our mortgage from $600K down to $200K. Since that $400K we just paid is now equity into our home, we're going to borrow it back out as a home equity line of credit. Now, once we borrow that back out, we're going to take that $400K, put it into our investment home as down payment. Then we're going to borrow the other $500K as mortgage. So now our picture looks something like this. You're still going to owe exactly what you owed before, which is a total of 1.1 mil. That doesn't change. But our cash flow will now look different, and it's going to look something like this. House number one rent is still $2,500. And we have a $200K mortgage on the house right now for $844 per month payment. We also have a $400K line of credit we took out from this house at 2.95% interest only. Our monthly payment will be $983. Now, house number two, again, rent is going to be the same, $4,000. And we have a mortgage of $500K. So our monthly payment will be $2,110. Take all the rent minus our payment, our total cash flow before other expense and tax is going to be $2,563 per month, and our yearly will be $30,000. So by restructuring our debt, we brought up our cash flow by $8,000 a year. But like I said, let's also look at write-off because we want to keep more on our hand. We want to pay less tax. So what is the write-off looking like? Well, house number one, there'll be two write-off you can do. First one is the $200K mortgage that you still have. The interest roughly for next 5 years is going to be $3,600 per year. We are still going to write off 50% because this mortgage is in our first home and we're taking half of it as self-use. So our yearly write-off will be estimated $1,800. Now here, we also have the $400K HELOC that we took out of house one, which our interest payment is going to be $11,000 per year. But for this $400K, we can actually write 100% of it off because we took that money and we bought another investment property. And since that property is 100% rental, this can be write off 100%. So which is $11,000 here. House number two, we're going to have a $500K mortgage here. So the rough interest payment per year is $9,000. We can write off 100% like before. So $9,000 is our write off. Now, adding all this together, our total interest write-off will be $22,600. So compared to before our original plan, we've actually created a $7,000 extra in write-off. So what that means is now not only they have a better cash flow, they can also write off more, so they pay less tax overall. And net after tax, after everything, they will be able to keep more on hand. Now, notice one thing is we're still owing 1.1 mil. Okay, that doesn't change. All we did here is by paying our available cash into first home and then borrowing back out for a second home, we've essentially shifted a lot of the debt on the first house into a second home, and that allow us to create much better write-off. Now again, is this for everyone? Answer is no. It depends on what you're looking for. You definitely need to talk to a professional and really go over your goals and what your objectives are before you make any decisions. And also, like I said here, a lot of the calculations have been simplified and omitted. We didn't even look too much into the tax consequence that each setup will give you. So you also want to calculate those before you make any decision. And also one more thing to understand is just because it's a good setup right now, no matter which one you take, it might not necessarily be a good setup 5, 10, 15 years down the road if things like interest rate change. So you always want to keep an eye on the way you set it up. Don't just assume your day one setup is always going to be good. Now finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about my view on rental properties, because this is also something a client always asks me about. And one thing they always ask is, do you think buying a property is always the best investment choice out there? So my honest answer personally is most of the time it's actually not, because of the fact that you rarely get positive cash flow. Even breaking even is very good already. To me, it just feels like it's a forced saving account where you solely relying on appreciation of the property, which I know will likely happen, but it doesn't make me feel very good holding on to it while waiting for it to happen. And this is also why if I'm going to look for a rental property, I rarely look into a house. I might look into a condo or a townhome or other development projects like multifamily, but not a single home, because of two things personally. One is how much it actually costs lump sum to fund a house. And number two is the rent per square footage I'm getting compared to other types of properties. Now, I know for condo, there are other problems as well, like strata fee can increase, condo insurance can get up, and there could be damage caused by someone else and requires me to fork out money to fix. All that will be part of the risk I need to assess and accept for the condo side. But just because houses don't have most of these risks doesn't mean they don't have their own disadvantages. And one of the big disadvantages I don't like for investing in a house for rental purpose is if anything happens to a house, a huge amount of liquidity that I have will be locked down in one single place. And to me, it's just not a very good idea. If, for example, the market have crashed 30% plus in March, if we have enough liquidity, then we can take advantage of that and buy in. And whatever return we make in there will be way more than what we get in a house for maybe the next 1, 2, or 3 years. Now, if that being said, it doesn't mean house is always bad. It just takes more planning, more thinking, more renovating and restructuring to make it cash flow efficient. So this is why I'm making this video. I just want to let you know, when you buy a rental property, it's not as simple as just get a mortgage and then just buy a house. There is a lot more to think about to really improve your efficiency and return on investment. And the most important thing is know what you're looking for, know what you're trying to achieve, and make sure your plan lets you achieve that objective. Alright, this might be a longer video. I hope you like what you're seeing here. If you like my content, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to my channel. Click the bell button so you get all the notifications in the future. This is Jacky. I hope you found this interesting. I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye!